Now, is D-Lim better than Suga? Okay. If you don't know who Suga is, he's part of BTS. And before last Saturday, Suga was better than D-Lim, but as of last Saturday, changed. Hopefully. Anyway, so welcome everyone. My name is Brian Lee. I'm the senior pastor of our congregation. I welcome you, and it's always a big joy of mine to worship together as a family. Today, we'll be jumping into the book of Exodus. Exodus is just filled with a lot of dramas and cool stories, so I hope you're ready for it. I don't think you need tissues today. I don't think I'll be crying. But yeah, all joking aside, I really thank God for Pastor Esther. I told her, as we've been talking about dream, when she was standing here delivering the word, God confirmed a lot of things that I've been praying about. So I thank Pastor Esther, and I thank God for working in her and through her. I hope you're blessed. And it kind of goes with the whole when life gives you tangerine theme these days. If you haven't seen that, I mean, if that drama's good, watch last week's sermon. You will need some tissues as well. Anyway, let's dive into today's message, the call of Moses. We all know the story of Moses very well, so I'm not going to spend too much time explaining who Moses is, but we'll focus on his calling and the passage for today. So with that, let me just start off by reading a couple verses from chapter 3 of Exodus. I'll pick it up from verse 7. This is right after he encountered God at the burning bush, and there's a conversation that takes place. Verse 7, the Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of the land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what shall I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you're to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. You probably know the saying that there are two most important days in our lives. One is what? The day we're born. And the second day is when? When you find out why. And I believe this moment for Moses was that second day, when he found out why he was born. So today, as we begin our study in the book of Exodus, we're going to look into Moses' birth and the day when he found out why. And before I jump into today's passage, let me give you some context and background information on this book. The word Exodus literally means to leave or depart. It is a story or narrative of God delivering his people out of Egypt. If you remember, since the last time that we were here, except for Job, back in Genesis 50, there was a character named Joseph. And a lot has happened since then, because today we find out from Joseph, people were doing well. Joseph was a prominent figure in Egypt. And the Israelites, they had a lot of favor and freedom. And all of a sudden, in Exodus, we find them in slavery. What happened in between? It tells us in chapter 1, verse 8 in Exodus, that when Joseph died, a new king to whom Joseph meant nothing came to power in Egypt and saw the Israelites as a threat. So the oppression began, and it lasted for a very, very long time. The time between Genesis 50 And today, where we pick up in chapter 3, some say it's about 300 to 400 years. So let this sink in for a little bit. One day, you felt like you were doing so well that under Joseph, they were just thriving as people of God. And it took one king to mess that up. They went from freedom to being oppressed for hundreds of years. What is the key theme of this book? The theme is that God fulfills His promise. That God fulfills His promise. So put yourselves in the situation of the people living at that time, living under oppression for hundreds of years. Generation after generation, you are under slavery. And the theme of this book is that God will fulfill His promise. And what were those promises of God? And let me just share 3 verses here to remind you of the promise. Back in Genesis 15, we learned that there was a covenant ceremony with Abraham, where God promised Abraham this. Chapter 15, verse 13 to 14. That the Lord said to him, "Know for certain that for 400 years your descendants will be strangers in a country not their own, and that they will be enslaved and mistreated there. But I will punish the nation they serve as slaves, and afterward they will come out." Not just come out, but he said they'll come out with great possessions. So that is a promise that was given many, many years ago to the Israelites. In chapter 50, before Joseph died, these are one of his last words to his family. Chapter 50, verses 24-25 says this, "Then Joseph said to his brothers, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land He promised." He says, God will surely come to your aid. And we'll see that being fulfilled in the book of Exodus. Another verse in Exodus chapter 3, verses 16-17, after God calls Moses, He tells Moses to go to the elders of the Israelites and tell them this. Tell them what? To remind them about God's promise. This is what it says in verse 16 and 17 in chapter 3 of Exodus. "Go, assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land flowing with milk and honey." That is a promise of God being fulfilled in this book. I hope you catch that. It's not just a story of cool things happening, miracle after miracle. It is a fulfillment of God's promise throughout this book. So as we look at the calling of Moses, I do want to take us through his whole life, not just this moment of burning bush, because I believe God's calling comes in all different shapes and sizes. And in particular case here, in Moses' case, his calling was a process. It was a process that began at the birth and was confirmed when he encountered God at the burning bush at the age of about 80 years old. This means some of you, and I'm pretty sure none of you here are 80 yet, as I look around. This means some of you might still be in that process. Getting to your own burning bush moment when you will realize the true purpose, real purpose of your life is still on the way. Don't be discouraged if you haven't figured out the purpose of your life. It might be coming. So with that, let's just dive into today's passage. First thing that I want to share, when we look at the calling of Moses, we see God's hand protecting Moses. As we look at the narrative of Moses' birth, since we don't have much time today, I'm not going to go into the detail and read through chapters 1 and 2. But we all know, many of us know, that his birth was not a normal birth. We see the hand of God moving powerfully to protect him and had Moses move from one place to another through God's sovereign plan and provision. In addition to God's protection, we see that Moses' calling involved many people. It wasn't just his journey. Many people were involved in his journey and his calling, like the midwives, his mom, his sister, and the daughter of Pharaoh. All these people come into the picture when we talk about the calling of Moses. So it was indeed a miracle, born into a time when all Hebrew boys were ordered to be killed. Remember that? There was a decree by the king, by Pharaoh, to kill all Hebrew boys, and yet Moses was spared. We see how God protected Moses through the women of his life. The midwives, as it says in chapter 1 of Exodus, they hid the boy. They hid many, many boys because they fear God over the king of Egypt. And there are miraculous connections in the call of Moses, like his mother, Miriam, and Pharaoh's daughter, how God connects these people with one another. It would not be an understatement to say that Moses would not be here today without the heroism and the faith of these wonderful women in his life. People risked their lives to keep Moses alive. And by doing so, you know what they did? They helped rescue the Israelites from slavery. They may not have thought that that's what they were doing, but that's exactly what they were doing. By keeping Moses protected, they were helping God rescue the Israelites from slavery. And in that, they fulfilled their calling. A few weeks ago, we learned about the loyal servant in book of Genesis who served his purpose by being faithful to his role in God's story. We learned that he was not the heir to the family line. Perhaps once he thought that he could be the heir to the family line. But it didn't matter to him. God's plan was accomplished regardless through his humble obedience and loyalty as he served the family. And that was the calling of the servant named Ebenezer. Some of us today, if not many of us, may not become like the next Moses. We all want to be. There's a reason why all these superhero movies are so popular, because we all want to be like Moses. We all want to be like David. We all want to be like Paul and Peter, or perhaps like Martin Luther King Jr. and other heroes that we aspire to be. But most of us, we have our unique role and calling in our own daily lives. Perhaps as a teacher, as an architect. What if God told you today that by the ways that you serve your company, your family, everyday life, you're actually fulfilling something greater than you think you're fulfilling. You're not just making money. What if God told you, whatever you do today, as you serve as a Sunday school teacher, as you serve in the nursery, you might not be like teaching Bible to them, but what if you're raising up the next Moses? We have to be very intentional and consider everything that we do with God's point of view. Not only God protected Moses, but God prepared Moses, as we see in the life of Moses. Just like Joseph that we saw in book of Genesis, Moses had preparation time. For Joseph, it was as a slave. It was in the prison. Where do you think he learned how to manage things? In the prison. And God used that very skill that he acquired in the prison to manage his inmates to one day become a prime minister of a nation, to learn to manage a nation. Everything that we're learning today, being trained today, will one day bear fruit. Be faithful. Everything you study at school, The way you serve faithfully in the small things and big things, God could use that. For Joseph, he had about 22 years of waiting and with lots of disappointments. You know how many years it took Moses? It took about 80 years. 80 years of training before he was called at this moment to serve his purpose. We have many, many more years to go. How did God train Moses? First, he was trained in the palace. You know what happened in the palace? Again, it was God's divine plan for him to end up in the palace. And when he ended up in the palace as a prince, not only he got to learn the culture and the language of the Egyptians, which became very useful later. As he went back, he knew the culture, he knew the language, he was able to communicate with them. Not only that, but there is an incident where Moses sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew man. Remember that? And then he kills the Egyptian in anger. And that makes him a fugitive. He runs away. But you know what I see in that episode? Is that God used that time to grow his heart for his own people. Although he wasn't ready to rescue them yet, he acted out of his own anger. But regardless, as he watched his own people being treated as slaves, being oppressed, I believe his heart was growing for his own people in the palace. The next place that God took him, from palace, he went to the wilderness. What did God do in the wilderness in Moses' life? God taught him how to be a shepherd, literally and spiritually. He became a shepherd. He had to learn to be patient with the sheep. We all know how dumb sheep can be. If you don't know, just look it up. Watch some videos and you'll be like, that's so dumb. And Bible compares people like sheep. Maybe you're smarter than me. Maybe you're a little bit smarter sheep than me. But I associate with that. We're like sheep. God was training Moses to be a shepherd with patience, with love, because he was going to have to deal with people like sheep for many, many years to come. I'm pretty sure Moses questioned God's purpose in life. What am I doing here, God? I was enjoying my life in the palace. I was able to eat anything I wanted. Enjoy the luxury of being a prince. But God literally just stripped him off of everything. Isn't it interesting that God brought him out to the wilderness where he could be all alone? Because oftentimes, those are the moments when we truly meet God, hear God. People ask me, why do we continue to send people to missions, go to short-term missions and spend all this money to do so? You know what I tell them? Oftentimes because we cannot have the same experience here because we're so busy, we're so occupied. And oftentimes when we go to these places, when everything's gone, we don't have to go to work, we don't have to worry about daily schedule. That's actually a moment when we hear God, receive God's vision for our lives and find out a purpose in life. When was the last time that you had a moment like that? Or are you like me? Or like most of us, we're constantly just busy with things. No wonder we cannot hear God. I hope and pray that God will take us to wilderness. Yes, it can be painful. Yes, it'll be very hard. There will be some suffering, but it's those moments when we truly understand who we are. What was God doing during that time? He was building up Moses' character. Over the next 40 years of his life, perhaps he was this young person with so much passion, wanting to make things happen on his own. But he had to learn to trust God, God's timing. He had to learn to become the leader to lead God's people, letting go of his own pride and ego and his will. Not only that, where did the people of God ended up? After they came out of Egypt, where did they go? They went to the wilderness. Who was the best person to guide them through the wilderness? Moses. He was there. He lived there 40 years. He was ready. He knew the whereabouts of this wilderness. He lived there. He took his sheep around. He was, in many ways, qualified to lead these people. I believe it was God's plan all along to train him in that matter. You know, when I was growing up, as many of you know, if you don't know, now you know, I'm a pastor's kid. We call ourselves PK. Not problem kid, pastor's kid, which can be same sometimes. I used to grumble a lot about being a PK because of all the expectations and the things that I had to go through, having like a front row seat to too many church dramas. Even as a young person, I had to watch so much ugliness of human being in the church. I actually hated seeing my parents constantly cater to the needs of others, who I felt they didn't deserve it. The way they were treating my parents, the way they were treating one another. As a young person filled with so much justice and fairness, I really felt like they didn't deserve my parents' love. And I always struggled to see that. I always felt like my parents had to sacrifice their lives, not only their lives, but our family, to serve the church. And it just didn't seem fair to a young person's mind. So I have to admit, there were some painful moments that I had to process and heal from. But as I was reflecting once again, not everything was bad. Not everything was bad. When I think more about it, most of my childhood memories are tied to church, good or bad. All the events and gatherings, playing in the church. I remember many moments when my dad would take me and my sister to church while he was prepping sermon or he would pray. We would just run around the church and just be kids. Even before my dad received his calling to pursue his pastoral ministry, I vaguely remember my mom serving as a Sunday school teacher or serving at VBS. I practically lived at church and was surrounded by church families all my life. And that's all I can recall. Little did I know that one day I will become a pastor of a local church. And this love and hate relationship with the church made me fall in love with the local church ministry and the people. Not only did I learn to grow through the upbringings as a pastor's kid, but I believe God was preparing me and training me to become a pastor today. And God knew I needed an early start because I am a slow learner. So through all this, I believe God does not waste a moment of our lives. Many of us think we wasted so many years and my experience is whatnot. But let me guarantee you that God does not waste any moment in your life. All your pains, all your successes. God will not waste a moment in your life. That's not how God works in His economy. God is not done with me, and God is not done with you. He is still training you and I, and still preparing us for what's to come. And when we look at the calling of Moses, God called him and he equipped Moses. Many of us can identify with Moses because his response is our response. And his excuse is our excuse. How often do we say things like, I can't do it, I'm not qualified, I'm not educated, I can't talk that well, no one will listen to me, maybe next time. Let someone else do it. I don't know about you, but I still say these things. I still can't believe I'm standing here today in front of so many people to deliver a sermon. If you knew me in middle school and high school, this would be the last thing that you would think of me doing in life. I still remember that one moment that I had to perform flute. Yes, I did play some flute in middle school. I was forced to play, as many Asian kids are. Stop forcing your kids to learn instruments, please. I never touched flute afterwards. Anyway, that's a sermon for another day. Anyway, I remember playing flute in front of the whole school because in the classroom, teacher was like, anyone play instrument? And I was like, yes, you'll be playing in front of the whole school. So I remember playing the flute. I was literally like this the whole time. Who would have ever guessed that I'll be speaking in front of so many people and become a public speaker? Not only that, but to speak in English. When I immigrated here, I spoke nothing because I was so embarrassed. I didn't know any English. Throughout my high school, I didn't talk to anyone because I was so embarrassed to even utter a word in English. Man, talk about transformation. God can use you. And if God can use me, He can use all of you. So God called Moses, and as I told you, God's timing is always perfect. I mean, we sang about that, right? Think about God's timing. When we look at verse 1 of chapter 3, right before the burning bush, you know what it says? Moses was tending the flock. Moses was just going about his day, being faithful to his everyday job. And that's the moment God came and called him. How often do we seek that moment? We seek after those moments. God, speak to me. But you know what? Oftentimes, God's calling and His voice may come in your daily life as you're being faithful to what you're called to do today. God's timing was perfect because the people were trying to kill Moses because of the thing that he did back in Egypt by killing an Egyptian. God says they're all dead. The people who knew of the sin, the crime of Moses, they all ceased. It was a good timing for him to go back. See, God knows. He waited for the time and He trained Moses to be ready for that time. When God calls you, know that God's timing is always perfect. As we see here, Moses felt like he wasn't ready. And he continues to tell God, you got the wrong person. But God knows what He's doing. So God draws Moses to the burning bush. I just love seeing one after another, it's always God initiating. God's the one who's calling. God's the one always knocking on our doors. Come to me. Come talk to me. Speak to me. I want to enter into your life. And He did that for Moses. Someone who was probably dealing with a lot of failure, sense of guilt and shame. But God came to him to empower him, to equip him, to draw him in. And there are many interpretations about this burning bush. But you know, as I was thinking about the burning bush, I was thinking about Moses. Watching this burning bush just burning and burning. I believe God was using that moment to reignite the fire in Moses' heart. The fire that he once had for his fellow Hebrew, that he had to act and kill an Egyptian. Perhaps after 40 years, because of the shame and guilt with failure, maybe it was gone. But as God came to him, as he was watching that fire burn and burn and burn, I felt like God was just reigniting that passion, stirring up that desire once again. And he now is an 80-year-old man. And one side comment that I want to make here is yesterday, a few days ago, I was having a conversation with our missionaries. And one of the things that we talked about is there's a age group of people we often overlook. Baby boomers, people on the, end of baby boomers, and perhaps the early generation X generation people. And there are a whole bunch of people here in this room. And oftentimes we say they're old. But you know what? They're not old. I believe in the coming years, you guys have a very important role. You may consider yourselves as overlooked generation because so often we focus so much on the younger generation. We need to raise up the young generation. But who's going to do that? Who's going to do that? Shouldn't the baby boomers and the Generation X? What is God calling you to do? If God called Moses when he was 80 years old and he was able to do something amazing for God's kingdom, where is God calling you? Where is God sending you? What passion is he reigniting in your hearts? Because oftentimes, as people get older, they take a back seat and say, you know what? I'm just going to let other people do it. But please don't do that. We need you. I pray that God will reignite your passion in your hearts. Because God has prepared you all your life for this. How do you want to utilize the experience, your education, your wisdom, and the resources that God has given you? I really pray that God will speak to you. Because it's not just the young people that God wants to use. God wants to use all of us. And you have so much to offer. And for younger people, I want you to go seek them out. Seek them out. Ask for their advice. Have meals with them and ask them how they navigated through their jobs, their life, and their marriage. They have so much to offer. When we look at God's calling, I really love how God works. God not only invites us, but he always shares his heart. God not only kicks us out and says, go, do what I tell you to do. God doesn't do that. But before he sends us out, God shares his heart with us. And that's exactly what God did. In verses 7 to 10, what we see is that God tells Moses of his heart. This is what he says. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt, and I've heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down, and I am sending you. God shares his concern with Moses. As God will do the same thing with you. God will share his heart. If you have certain longing and desire and passion or compassion for certain things, it's God sharing his heart with you before he commissions you out. But we see Moses and his reluctance. And in his response, many people can say, oh, Moses is just being humble. God, I can't do this. Oftentimes we think we're being humble when we say things like this. God, I can't do it. I'm not good enough. Send someone else. That's actually a false humility. You know what that's called? It's called disobedience. It sounds good when we say things like that. I say this all the time too. It sounds like we're humbling ourselves, but it's a very self-centered and faithless statement when we say things like that. Because his mission that God called him, it wasn't about what Moses had to offer. At the end, God equipped him with everything he needed. But Moses was so concerned about himself, what he could do, what he couldn't do. And that made him to say these faithless statements. Something for all of us to think about. But we see that God equipped Moses. And we see that in the Bible, all throughout the scripture. When God calls, He equips us with the tools and the resources we need to accomplish God's mission. Those of you who are following the Bible Project reading as a church, not Bible Project, the Bible reading, you're reading how God equipped people like Bezalel or Holiab with everything they needed to know to be crafty. God gave them talent so that they can use their talent to build a tabernacle. When God calls you, He will equip you. Whatever resources you need, He will either give it to you or provide it through something else. There are many passages in the Bible, like 2 Peter chapter 1, verses 3, 4. It says that God's divine power has given us everything we need. Everything we need. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 20 to 21 says, God of peace will equip you with every good for doing His will. These are words of God. So how did God equip Moses so that he finally said, okay, I will go? There are three things that He equipped him with. One, with His presence. When Moses replied to God, who am I, God? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring these people out? The response from the Lord is simply, I will be with you. I will be with you. When Jesus commissioned His disciple to go make disciples of all nations, you know what one promise that Jesus gave them? I will be with you. I will be with you. God's presence is a promise. It's not a conditional thing. It's a promise that God gives us as He sends us out. Second, with His power. God gives us His power, or He walks with us with His power. In verse 19 and 20, this is what He says. When Moses said, but I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go. God says, will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that, He will let you go. It wasn't based on his speech. It was never about how good he is. It was never about how scary the serpent is. It was always about God and His power. And the last thing that He equipped him was a partner, team. In chapter 4, he says, Moses says to the Lord, even after all this, if I were God, I'd be like, you know what, forget you. You have too many excuses. I'll just move on to someone. But thank God he doesn't do that with us. So after all that, Moses still says, I can't do this. He says, pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent, neither in the past nor since you have spoken to your servant. I'm slow of speech and tongue. And Lord said to him, who gave you human beings their mouth? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. And you would think Moses would be like, okay, I get it. But this is what he said again, pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else. Then the Lord's anger burned against Moses and He said, what about your brother, Aaron the Levite? I know he can speak well. In fact, He's already on His way to meet you, and He'll be glad to see you. You shall speak to Him, put words in His mouth. I'll help both of you speak, and will teach you what to do. He will speak to the people for you, and it will be as if He were your mouth, and as if you were God to Him. God provides for us. He not only goes with us, He not only performs everything that He needs to through us, but He provides us with people that we need. And that's why community is so important. You and I would not be able to fulfill our mission on our own. No matter how talented you are, no matter how educated you are, no matter whether you feel like you need someone or not, Bible makes it very clear that you need one another. Please, as you navigate through your life, your calling, and even this difficult season, don't ever think that you can stand on your own. Please. I have the worship team come up. The enemy will make us believe that no one understands what I'm going through. He will isolate us. He will make us believe that I can handle myself. But that's a lie. You need one another. I need all of you to support, to encourage. This whole Americanism of respect the individuals and respect their privacy, it sounds good, but it's actually very not biblical. It's not. And that doesn't mean that I need to know everything that's happening in your life, that I want to be nosy. No. God designed us as a community so that I cannot be complete without you, your presence in my life. So please, as I said in my email, if you are struggling with everything that's happening in this nation, please, I would love to talk to you. I would love to pray with you. We would like to support you. I may not have all the answers. I don't. I wish I do. I'm as scared as you. Just because I'm a pastor doesn't mean every day I'm like, God's got this. You know the people who say that? Deep inside, we all have fear. I have a lot of fear. Every time I listen to the news, I struggle. I hate certain individuals. But we're in this together. Let's process together. Let's grow together. Let's suffer together. So last thing that I want to share before we go into time of response. There are two things I thought about in terms of how we can apply the call of Moses in our lives. Perhaps two angles of looking at this. Maybe some of us are like Moses, struggling with calling. And perhaps you are called to lead others, to rescue others. So the question to you is that, how will you respond to God when He calls you? And what is holding you back from saying, yes, Lord? Remember, if God is truly your Lord, no Lord cannot be in the same sentence. No and Lord cannot be right next to each other. Because Lord, if Lord is truly the Lord of our lives, no does not belong there. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. So if you're like Moses, God's calling you for such a time as this to lead and help others, I pray that you respond to Him, that you struggle with Him. Second, I believe there are people in this room that you may not be Moses, but you may be like the people, the Israelites, in need of Moses in your life to come and lead you out. Perhaps you are under the bondage. Perhaps sin, bondage of fear, perhaps bondage of selfishness, and you are trapped by false idol worship. Can I dare to say, perhaps this one of the false idol is political ideology, religious traditions, perhaps relationships. And many of us, we're trapped and enslaved by this quote-unquote called American dream of pursuing comfort and success in this world. Not just for me, but even for our children. We are inviting them into this entrapment instead of freeing them to dream for God, to live for God. Perhaps you are in need, someone like Moses to come into your life, to lead you out, to make you realize that this is not the life that God has for you. But you are called to go out. Instead of worshiping these false idols, you have to go out and worship Him. So I don't know where you belong, but I want you to wrestle with that today in the days to come. So I'm going to invite all of you to stand with me. We're going to sing this song. Let's just be real with God. And I say this so often. We don't have the luxury to play games and play church. Let's be real with God. Either we go all in or not. There was no middle ground. Even though Moses struggled as much as he did, he went. Although he reluctantly obeyed, he went. And God was able to use him. What about you? What about you? So as we sing this song, let's just deal with our hearts and surrender everything to Him who knows our best. Let's do that.